Hi, second graders. The last time I read to you, we left off, and Roz just hatched out of her crate into the world. So we're on chapter 5. You should have already listened to 1 through 4 if you are starting this video. The robot grave site. Those otters were now hiding behind a rock. Their round heads nervously poked, and they watched as the sparkling monster emerged from the crate. The monster slowly turned her head as she scanned the coastline. Her head turned and turned all the way around. It didn't stop turning until she was looking right at the otters. "Hello, otters. My name is Roz." The robot's voice was simply too much for the skittish creatures. The biggest otter squeaked, and the whole gang suddenly took off. They galloped back across the robot grave site, flopped into the ocean, and raced through the waves as fast as they could. Roz watched each otter go, but her eyes lingered on the sparkling objects that littered the shore. The objects looked strangely familiar. The robot swung her left leg forward, then her right, and just like that, she was taking her very first steps. She stomped away from her crate and over the rocks and through the gravesite until she was standing above a broken robot body. She leaned in and noticed the words Rozzum, Rozzum, lightly etched on the torso. She noticed the same word on all the torsos, including her own. Roz continued to explore the gravesite until a playful little ocean wave washed over the rocks. She automatically stepped away from it. Then a bigger wave sloshed towards her. She stepped away again. And then a gigantic wave crashed over the rocks and engulfed the entire gravesite. Heavy water pounded against her body and knocked her to the ground. Her damaged sensors flared for the first time. A moment later, the wave was gone and Roz lay there, dripping and dented and surrounded by dead robots. Again, Peter Brown referring to the robots as dead, however, they were never alive to begin with. So he's kind of like putting that idea in our head that Roz is going to have some feelings and do some things that may surprise us since she's a robot. Roz could feel her survival instincts, a part of her computer brain that made her want to avoid danger and take care of herself so she could function properly. Her instincts were urging her to move away from the ocean. She carefully got to her feet and saw that high above the shore, the land was busting with trees and grasses and flowers. It looked lush and safe up there. It looked like a much better place for a robot. She had just one problem. To get up there, she would have to climb the sea cliffs. Chapter 6, The Climb. Crack, thunk, clang. Roz was having a little trouble climbing the cliffs. She had a new dent on her rear and a long scrape along her side. She was just about to get another ding when a crab scuttled out from under a piece of driftwood. The crab looked up and immediately showed off his giant claws. Everyone was afraid of his claws, but not the robot. She just looked down and introduced herself. "Hello, crab. My name is Roz." After a brief standoff, the crab cautiously backed away, and that's when Roz noticed how easily he moved over the rocks. With his wide stance and his grippy feet, the crab could crawl up and down the rock face. So Roz decided to try out his climbing technique. She spread her arms wide and clamped each of her hands onto the cliffside. She jammed one foot into a crack and lifted her other foot onto the narrow ledge. And just like that, she was climbing. Roz moved awkwardly at first. A chunk of rock crumbled in her hand. She had trouble finding her footholds. But as she climbed higher and higher, she started to get the hang of it. Seagulls squawked from their cliff nests and soared away when the robot came too close. But Roz paid them no mind. She was focused only on getting to the top. And up she went, methodically climbing past nests, ledges, tiny trees rooted in cracks, and before long the robot felt the soft soil of the island beneath her feet. And there's Roz climbing. Chapter 7, The Wilderness. Animal sounds filled the forest, chirps and wing beats and rustlings of the underbrush, and then from the sea cliffs there came new sounds, heavy, crunching footprints. The forest animals fell silent, and from their hiding places they watched as a sparkling monster stomped past. But the forest was not a comfortable place for Roz. Jagged rocks, fallen trees, tangled underbrush made it difficult for her to walk. She stumbled along, struggling to keep her balance, until her foot snagged and she toppled over like a piece of timber. It wasn't a bad fall. No dings, no dents, just dirt. But Roz was programmed to keep herself in good working order. And once she was back on her feet, she immediately began cleaning herself off. Her hands... Oh, Elliot. Don't do it. Where was I? Her hands darted around her body, quickly brushing and picking off every speck of dirt. Only when the robot was sparkling again did she continue through the forest. Really? Like, what are you after? Cats, right? Am I right? Roz stumbled on until she found a patch of ground that was flat and open and carpeted with pine needles. It seemed like a safe place, and safety was all the robot really wanted. So she stood there, motionless, all perfect lines and angles set against the irregular shapes of the wilderness. Chapter 8, The Pine Cones. If you stand in a forest long enough, eventually something will fall on you. And Roz had been standing in the forest long enough. The gentle wind whispered through the treetops, and then, thunk! A pine cone bounced off her head. The robot looked down and watched the pine cone roll to a stop. It seemed harmless, so Roz went on doing nothing. A few hours later, a gust of wind rustled through the tree tops, and then, thunk! The robot looked down and another pine cone rolled away. Then, a few hours after that, the howling wind tore through the tree tops. It bent trunks, shook branches, and then, thunk, 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 the pine cones began raining down. Thunk, thunk. Roz felt something like annoyance. Thunk. She quickly scanned the area for somewhere safe from pine cones. She spotted the perfect place when she looked up at a huge, rocky shape that towered above the forest. Chapter 9, The Mountain. Roz was now stomping her way up the mountain. Dense forest and rocky outcrops forced the robot to zig and zag and backtrack. But after an hour of steady hiking, she arrived at the cratery mountain peak. Grasses and flowers and shrubs sprouted from every pocket of soil. But there were no trees at the top. Roz was safe from those annoying pine cones. She dusted herself off and then carefully climbed up a leaning slab of stone. It was the highest point of the entire mountain. The robot slowly turned her head completely around. She saw the ocean stretching to the horizon in every direction. And in that moment, Roz learned what you and I have known since the beginning of this story. In that moment, Roz finally realized that she was on an island. Roz looked down and surveyed the island. From the sandy southern point, the island grew wider and greener and hillier until it finally jutted up into the rocky cone of the mountain. Some places of the mountain fell away, leaving sheer cliffs. A waterfall rushed off one of the cliffs and fed a river that wound its way down a great meadow in the center of the island. The river flowed past wildflowers and ponds and boulders and then disappeared into the forest. Blurry shapes suddenly cut through the robot's vision. She refocused her eyes and saw vultures circling above the foothills. And then she noticed lizards warming themselves on a distant rock. A badger peeked out from a berry bush. A moose waded through the stream. A flock of sparrows turned in perfect unison above the trees. The island was teeming with life. And now it had a new kind of life. A strange kind of life. Artificial life. We're going to stop there. So that was chapter 5 through 10. My next video, I'll read chapter 10 and so on. So I think in each video I'll read for about 10 minutes and then we'll collect all the videos, and then that'll make it easy for you at home to listen to them in like 10-minute snippets. That way you don't have to like find where you left off. I think that the read aloud is kind of going to be at your own pace, and I will continue to post journal entry ideas, and I'll also continue to read, in segments of 10 minutes. I will see you in my next video. Bye, guys.